Welcome back to another deep dive. Today, we are setting out on a mission to um, completely dismantle and rebuild the way you look at basically every single human institution in your life.
Yeah, it's a pretty massive undertaking.
Right. And I want to start with a concept we're all pretty comfortable with, the medical diagnosis.
Oh, that's a great place to start.
Because there is a certain comfort in the way we diagnose physical things, right?
Mhm.
It feels precise. It feels like engineering. You fall off your bike, your arm hurts, you go to the hospital, and the x-ray shows a very clear, jagged white line.
Exactly. The doctor just points to the screen and says, well, there it is. That's the problem.
Right. And it's highly comforting because it's binary. Like the bone is broken or it is not broken.
Yes, and the problem is visible, it's localized, and most importantly, it exists independently of how you feel about it. I mean, the x-ray doesn't care about your mood or the hospital's administrative policies.
Totally. But then, you step out of that literal hospital room, you start trying to diagnose the abstract human systems we live inside of.
Right, the social system.
Exactly. You look at a failing school district or a deeply toxic corporate workplace or a struggling marriage or even just a society that feels fundamentally fractured. And suddenly, we are completely lost.
Yeah, that x-ray machine is completely broken.
It is. We point at things we think are the problem, like maybe it's funding, maybe it's leadership, communication. But the jagged white line is never actually clear.
It is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters. I mean, we know something is profoundly wrong, we can feel the pain of it, but the tools we use to locate the fracture are completely unsuited for the task.
And what do we usually do in those muddy waters? We just pull out our standard corporate or sociological measuring sticks. We look at a failing system and we ask, well, is it efficient?
Right, or is it growing?
Yeah. Is the system surviving the current market conditions?
Hmm.
But the source material we are unpacking today argues something that actually stopped me in my tracks.
It's a pretty bold claim.
It really is. It argues that by asking those specific questions about efficiency and growth, we are not just failing to find the problem, we are actively making the situation worse.
That is the crux of the entire argument, yes. Because by applying the logic of a machine to a human system, we stabilize the very dynamics that are causing the harm in the first place.
Wow.
We keep the patient bleeding, because we're too obsessed with how efficiently the blood is draining.
God, that is a dark but perfect analogy.
Mm-hmm.
So, to figure out how to build a better x-ray machine for human culture, we are taking a deep dive into an academic white paper dated May 24th, 2026.
Written by Dr. Bachara-Sahili.
Right, and it's titled Toward a Maturana-Informed Viability Grammar. Now, really quickly, before we actually get our hands dirty with the concepts in this paper, I need to make a very important note for you listening.
Yes, this is crucial context.
Right, because throughout this deep dive, we're going to be exploring the author's critique of some pretty heavily loaded, politically charged concepts.
Things that can easily trigger defensive reactions.
Exactly. I mean, the source material uses terms like extractive economies, it critiques patriarchal culture, and it examines ideas of domination and enemy making. So it is crucial to state right out of the gate that we are neutrally reporting the author's perspectives and examples here.
Yeah, we are absolutely not taking political sides, right or left.
No, not at all. Our mission today is simply to convey these concepts exactly as they are presented in this fascinating source material so, you can test them out and evaluate them for yourself.
Which is really the only way to approach a text like this. I mean, the framework presented here doesn't just challenge a specific political party or an economic theory.
Right.
It challenges the foundational lens through which we view almost everything in Western thought.
Okay, let's unpack this. Dr. Sully is proposing what he calls a viability grammar. And from what I gather, a grammar in this context isn't about, like, verbs and nouns.
No, not at all.
It's more of a set of diagnostic tools, like a completely new vocabulary and a new way of asking questions to determine whether a system, any system, conserves or negates the conditions required for human beings to actually live.
Right. And to really grasp what a viability grammar is, we have to start with the core paradigm shift of the entire paper.
Okay, what's that?
We have to completely abandon the idea that systems are objects. We have to stop looking at a hospital, a school, or an economy from the outside as if it were a complex clockwork mechanism that just needs its gears oiled.
Right, because a hospital is not a machine. A school isn't a machine.
Exactly. They are not entities that exist separate from the people inside them. Instead, this paper argues we must view these institutions as manners of living.
Manners of living.
Yes. They are specific ways of relating to one another that human beings are actively, continuously bringing into existence. So if a school is toxic, it's not because the school machine is broken.
Wait, then why is it toxic?
It's because the people within it are actively conserving a toxic manner of living through their daily interactions. And to understand how this works, the author leans heavily on the biological and epistemological work of the Chilean biologist Humberto Maturana.
Humberto Maturana. Okay, so we are taking a massive leap here. We are starting with biology, literally the study of living organisms, to somehow figure out how to diagnose human culture.
It's a leap, but it's a necessary one.
Right. And the paper makes it really clear that before we can diagnose if a human system is viable, we have to completely redefine what the word living actually means.
We do, because honestly, our standard definition of living is terribly flawed.
How so?
Well, if I ask the average person to define what it means for an organism to be alive, they would likely talk about survival, the avoidance of death, remaining in a static state of existing.
Right. I mean, survival is usually framed as a victory condition, like did the company survive the recession? Did the animal survive the winter? It's a binary outcome.
Just like the broken bone.
Exactly. Alive or dead.
But from Maturana's biological perspective, survival isn't a mechanism. It's just a retroactive description an observer makes. You look at a bird and say, it survived the storm.
Yeah.
But that tells you absolutely nothing about how the bird is actually functioning in the present moment. So the paper corrects this by defining living not as static permanence, but as conservation through change.
Okay, conservation through change. I want to pause on that because it sounds like a total oxymoron. How do you conserve something by changing it?
Well, think about your own physical body. The cells you have today are not the cells you had 10 years ago.
True.
You are constantly ingesting food, breathing air, shedding skin, replacing cellular structures. The molecular components of your body are in a state of absolute frantic turnover.
Right, I'm basically a whole new person on a cellular level.
Exactly. And the environment around you is also changing. Temperatures fluctuate, viruses attack, gravity pulls. You are changing, the world is changing.
So I am not a static object. I am more like a continuous process.
Precisely. Living continues as long as the fundamental organization of that process, the relationship between your parts that makes you you, and your operational congruence with your environment are conserved.
Okay, that makes sense.
So living is not the opposite of change. Living is the specific condition that allows change to happen without the organism completely disintegrating.
Okay, I get that on a cellular level. But how does this scale up? The paper mentions that because living systems are always doing this dance of conservation through change, they never exist in a vacuum.
Right, there's always a context.
Yeah, we have to look at the space they are dancing in. And here is where I found a concept that I think clears up a lot of really sloppy thinking.
Which one?
The paper draws a very hard line between the medium and the niche. We usually just use the word environment for everything outside of our bodies, but the author says that's a big mistake.
It's a huge mistake, because the word environment implies a pre-existing static stage that an organism is just dropped onto, like an actor walking onto a theater set.
Like the world is just there, and we are in it.
Right. But biologically, it is much more nuanced than that. The medium is the broad general domain of all possible circumstances. An ocean is a medium. A dense forest is a medium. A modern city is a medium.
But the niche is different.
Very different. The niche is the specific organism-medium relation that is actually being lived by that specific creature.
Okay, let me see if I can ground this. If the ocean is the medium, you have a great white shark and a sea sponge living in that exact same ocean.
Yes.
Geographically, they're in the exact same environment. But the shark's niche-like, the way it experiences the water pressure, its speed, its relationship to prey, the sensory input of blood in the water, is an entirely different universe from the sea sponge's niche. Right?
Completely different.
Because the sponge is just stationary, filtering microscopic particles, experiencing the ocean simply as a flow of nutrients.
That is a perfect biological illustration. The medium is identical. The lived niches are completely alien to one another. Now let's elevate that into the human sphere, because this is where the diagnostic power really starts to reveal itself.
Okay, let's do it.
Imagine a major metropolitan city. New York, London, Tokyo. That city is the medium. The physical buildings, the weather, the laws, the transit systems, They are technically the same for everyone.
But the niches are radically different.
Completely. The lived niche of a wealthy, able-bodied corporate executive in that city involves hailing cabs, moving seamlessly through high-security buildings, eating at specific restaurants, and experiencing the city as a landscape of rapid opportunity and access.
While the lived niche of, say, an undocumented immigrant or a person relying on a wheelchair in that exact same city is fundamentally different.
Exactly.
The physical concrete is the same, but the stairs are barriers, the police presence is a threat rather than a comfort, and the transit system is a series of stressful negotiations.
Precisely. They share a medium, but they do not share a niche. And the reason this distinction is so vital for this viability grammar is that it prevents us from making blanket statements about the environment.
Right.
You cannot just say, oh, this city is a great place to live. You have to ask, great for whose specific niche?
Which perfectly tees up the next massive biological concept the paper introduces, which is structural coupling.
Ah, yes.
If I'm understanding this right, structural coupling is the history of recurrent, congruent changes between an organism and its medium over time. But the paper makes a very counterintuitive claim here.
It does.
It says the environment does not instruct or determine the organism. It only triggers changes based on the organism's existing structure.
This is perhaps the most difficult aspect of Maturana's biology for people to accept because it goes entirely against our basic understanding of cause and effect.
Yeah, it really does.
We tend to think that the outside world pushes on us and therefore causes our reaction. But structurally, that is mathematically impossible. The environment can perturb or disturb an organism, but the organism's own internal structure dictates what the response will be.
Okay, I have to play devil's advocate here because this sounds like a trap.
Go for it.
If I am deeply, profoundly unhappy at a highly toxic corporate job, you're telling me the job isn't causing my unhappiness. That feels incredibly invalidating.
I know.
It sounds like you are letting the toxic job entirely off the hook and blaming me for having the wrong structure.
I completely understand that reaction, and it's the most common resistance to this idea. But let's look closer. Think about walking on a hiking trail full of jagged rocks. You step awkwardly on a rock, and your ankle twists and sprains.
Okay.
Did the rock instruct your ankle to swell up, tear its ligaments, and send pain signals to your brain?
Well, no. The rock doesn't have an instruction manual for human ligaments. The rock is just a rock.
Right.
My body's biological structure, the specific tension of my tendons, the way my nervous system processes tissue damage, that is what creates the swelling and the pain in response to the encounter with the rock.
Exactly. The rock triggered the disturbance, but your body's structure determined the response. If a tank rolled over that exact same rock, its structure would not produce a sprained ankle.
No, it would just crush it.
Right. The tank's structure dictates a totally different interaction with the same disturbance. What is happening here is what Maturana calls avoiding domain confusion.
Domain confusion, meaning we mix up what is happening in the environment with what is happening inside the organism.
Precisely. What's fascinating here is that if we don't understand structural coupling, we fall into two very dangerous diagnostic traps.
What's the first one?
The first is internalism, which is what you were worried about. That's when we blame the isolated individual. We say, you just aren't resilient enough for this corporate environment. You need more mindfulness training. You need to be tougher.
Whoa, wait a
We
minute.
ignore the jagged rocks entirely and act like a perfectly strong ankle should be able to twist in any direction without breaking.
Which is exactly what a lot of corporate wellness programs do. Like, here's a yoga class to help you deal with our 80-hour work week.
Right. It puts all the onus on the individual structure. But the second trap is the exact opposite. Environmental determinism.
Okay.
This is the belief that the environment completely dictates our fate, like we are just passive lumps of clay being molded by the hands of our boss. If we believe that, we surrender our agency entirely. We say, the job made me this way, I have no choice.
So how does structural coupling offer a way out of both of those traps?
By recognizing the ongoing dance, you and the toxic job are structurally coupled. The job acts, your boss yells, the deadlines are impossible. That is a disturbance. But your specific history and structure dictate your response. Maybe you adapt by becoming hypervigilant, constantly anticipating the boss's anger. Maybe you adapt by emotionally shutting down and doing the bare minimum. You are surviving. You are maintaining your conservation through change.
But I'm adapting to something that is actively damaging me.
Exactly. You can structurally couple to a harsh extractive institution. You will adapt to it because living systems always try to maintain operational congruence.
Yeah.
But the manner in which you adapt might involve narrowing your possibilities, living in chronic stress, and normalizing suffering. The job isn't let off the hook. The job is providing a highly destructive medium.
But I am not a passive victim either.
Right. Your structural response is participating in the niche that is being conserved.
That is a phenomenal distinction. The freezing, the anxiety, that is my structural response to a destructive medium. And because living is this continuous structurally coupled dance with our environment, we have to look at how we actually move and act in that space.
Yes, we do.
If the environment isn't dictating my actions like a puppet master, and my internal structure is generating my response, what actually drives my behavior in that moment?
That is the perfect transition. Because to understand how we move in the medium, we have to completely reevaluate what behavior actually is.
Okay.
We tend to think of behavior as an output. Like, I have a thought, my brain sends a signal, and my body produces a behavior.
Like a printer spitting out a piece of paper.
Right. But this framework argues that behavior is not something an organism produces in a vacuum. Behavior is purely relational.
Relational.
Yes. It is the relational flow occurring in the actual encounter between the living system and the medium.
The author uses a really simple physical metaphor here that helped me, a footstep. A step is not located inside the leg alone.
Exactly. You cannot have a footstep in a vacuum. The leg moves, yes, but the step only exists in the dynamic relationship between the leg and the ground.
Right.
If the ground is ice, the behavior of the step changes entirely, even if the leg muscles fire in the exact same sequence. Speech is not in the mouth alone, it is in the speaker-listener relation. Behavior is a relational occurrence.
Okay, so if behavior is the relational flow between me and the world, what governs that flow? Like, what decides whether my footsteps tentatively or aggressively or playfully?
Well,
The paper points to a concept that I think is going to challenge a lot of listeners. It points to emotioning. And notice the ing. Not emotion as a static noun, but emotioning as an active verb.
this is one of Maturana's most profound contributions. We usually think of emotions as private, inner feelings. You feel sad inside your chest, you feel angry in your head.
Yeah, that's how we talk about it.
But biologically, emotioning is not a private internal feeling. It is the relational domain that specifies what behaviors are even mathematically possible for you in a given moment.
I really want to dig into this because this was a massive aha moment for me. We usually say, I am angry, therefore I yell. The anger is the internal cause, the yelling is the external result.
Right.
But this framework flips that entirely. It says the emotioning is the landscape of possibilities.
Let's use a very grounded example to show how this works. Imagine a child who is living in a state of fear. Fear is their current domain of emotioning.
Okay.
In that domain, the menu of possible actions available to that child is drastically narrowed. If you approach them, what can they do? They can hide, they can freeze, or they can strike out in self-defense. That is their entire menu.
Wow.
If you try to hand them a complex puzzle or ask them to be creative, they literally cannot do it because creative exploration does not exist on the menu in the domain of fear.
Oh, man. Okay, now imagine that exact same child an hour later in a state of deep play and security.
In the domain of play, the menu of possible actions expands exponentially. They can share, they can invent, they can fail without panic, they can collaborate.
So emotioning isn't just a colorful decoration around our behavior. It is the literal boundary of what we are capable of doing.
It is the domain in which the behavior becomes possible. Think about a manager correcting an employee. The words might be identical. This report needs to be redone.
Right.
But if the relational domain between them is care and mutual respect, that correction is a moment of learning. If the relational domain is fear and competition, those exact same words become a profound humiliation.
The action isn't specified by the dictionary definition of the words.
No, it is specified by the emotioning in which it is lived.
Okay, here is where we have to tackle the elephant in the room. Because, as I was reading this academic white paper, which is full of terms like recursive coordination and epistemological shifts, suddenly the author starts leaning heavily on a word that you almost never see in scientific literature.
I know exactly where you're going with this.
Love. He contrasts it with aggression. But, love as a biological necessity. I have to admit, I bristled at this. It sounds incredibly poetic. It sounds like something from a self-help retreat, not a rigorous diagnostic framework. Is he really arguing that love is a biological mechanism?
He is, and Maturana was famous for this. But We have to rigorously divorce this concept from everything Hollywood has taught us about the word love.
Okay, how so?
It is not romantic. It is not sentimental. It does not mean feeling a warm, fuzzy affection for someone. It doesn't mean being endlessly tolerant or letting people walk all over you.
So how does the paper actually define it?
Biologically, love is defined as the relational domain where the other arises as a legitimate other in coexistence.
A legitimate other in coexistence, meaning they have a right to be there
Yeah.
exactly as they are without having to prove their worth to me.
Precisely. It means you are interacting with them in a way that does not demand they justify their right to exist. You accept their structure as a legitimate. Now, practically, this is incredibly robust. You can vehemently oppose someone's behavior. You can set a very firm boundary. You can fire someone from a job or enact strict accountability while still remaining entirely in the domain of love.
Wait, how can you fire someone in the domain of love? That sounds crazy.
Because firing them is about their operational congruence with the job's requirements, not about their fundamental right to exist as a human being.
Oh, I see.
If you fire them by clearly explaining the mismatch, without humiliating them, without attacking their character, and treating them as a whole person transitioning out of a role, you are not denying their legitimacy. You are simply changing the terms of coexistence.
But if I fire them by publicly shaming them, telling them they're worthless, and having security escort them out like a criminal to make an example out of them.
Then you have crossed into the domain of aggression, because aggression in this framework isn't just physical violence or yelling. Aggression is any relational domain where the other's existence is denied, marginalized, or rendered illegitimate.
That is a staggering definition of aggression because it means I can be perfectly polite, speaking in a very calm, HR-approved tone of voice, but if I am treating you purely as an obstacle or as a mere data point, that is biologically defined as aggression.
Absolutely. The calmest voices often enact the most profound aggression. Let's really flesh out a concrete example from the paper to show how this works systemically.
Let's hear it.
Take a clinical encounter in a modern hospital. A doctor walks into a patient's room. If that doctor sits down, looks at the patient, listens to their lived experience, and treats them as a complex, legitimate human being whose fear and pain actually matter, that medical encounter is occurring in the domain of love.
Even if they are just checking blood pressure.
Even then, the relational space is one of legitimacy. But what if the hospital administration has mandated that doctors can only spend 7 minutes per patient?
Which happens all the time.
Right. The doctor walks in. The doctor is stressed, staring at a tablet. The patient is no longer a human being. The patient is bed 4, a throughput metric, a diagnostic category that needs to be processed and billed as quickly as possible.
Medical treatment might be technically flawless. The dosage of medicine might be perfect.
Yes, the technical execution is fine. But the relational domain has shifted from love to use. The patient's legitimacy as a whole person is negated by the system's demand for efficiency.
And in this grammar, use is a form of aggression.
Yes. Purpose replaces legitimacy. And when a human system replaces legitimacy with purpose, love is lost, and the relational medium becomes actively damaging to everyone involved.
Including the doctor, who is structurally coupling to a system that forces them to act in aggression all day long. That is incredibly dark, but it makes so much sense.
It really does.
So if emotioning dictates what we can do, and whether we're acting in love or aggression,
Well,
how do we scale this up? How do a bunch of human beings operating in these emotional domains actually build these massive, complex worlds together? Is it just instinct?
it is not instinct, it is language. But again, we have to redefine our terms. The paper moves from emotioning directly into how our emotioning braids with our words. It moves to languaging.
Languaging, another verb.
Yes. Maturana famously argued against the idea that language is just a system for transferring information. If I say apple, I am not taking a packet of meaning from my brain and transmitting it into your brain.
Right, because structural coupling says, I can't instruct your brain,
Yeah.
I can only trigger your structure.
Exactly. Language does not transmit meaning. It coordinates behavior. The formal definition the paper uses is that languaging is the recursive consensual coordination of doings.
Okay, I have to stop you there. Recursive consensual coordination of doings. That is a mouthful of academic jargon. Let's break that down into plain English.
Let's parse it. Coordination of doings means we are acting together. If we carry a heavy sofa together, we are coordinating our doings. Consensual doesn't mean we signed a contract. It means our structures have mutually adapted to work together. And recursive means it folds back on itself repeatedly. We don't just coordinate once, We coordinate our coordinations.
So we use language not just to describe a world that already exists. We live in languaging. And by constantly coordinating our behaviors with each other over and over, we actually bring shared worlds into existence.
Yes, language creates realities.
This was the concept that finally made the X-ray machine analogy click for me again. Languaging brings forth symbolic worlds that have very real physical consequences.
Give me an example.
Well, we literally talk things into reality. Think about money.
Uh-huh.
A $100 bill is just a piece of paper with some ink on it. It has no biological reality.
None.
But because millions of us engage in the recursive consensual coordination of doings around that piece of paper, we agree to exchange it for food, labor, shelter. It becomes completely real.
It becomes a lived reality. Borders between countries, credit scores, corporate hierarchies, national debt.
Yeah.
None of these things exist in the physical universe outside of human languaging. But because we coordinate our behaviors around them recursively, they dictate who thrives and who starves. We talk the economy into existence, and suddenly it is a medium that we must structurally couple with to survive.
And here is where it gets incredibly powerful. When you take languaging, this ability to talk reality into existence, and you braid it together with emotioning, the relational domain of love or aggression, you get what the paper calls conversation.
Conversation in this framework isn't just having a chat over coffee. It is the intertwined flow of what we are physically coordinating and the emotional domain in which we are doing it.
The source material gives a brilliantly simple example of this. Take the words, "come here." Two simple words.
Right.
If those words are spoken in the emotional domain of care, the conversation is an invitation. It creates a space of safety. But if those exact same words, "come here," are spoken in the emotional domain of domination, the conversation is a threat. It creates a space of fear.
The linguistic symbols are identical. The conversation, the lived reality that is generated, is entirely different. And this leads us to the pinnacle of human systems.
That's it.
When a specific network of these conversations becomes closed, recurrent, and conserved over time, you get culture.
So culture isn't art or food or music.
No. Culture is a closed network of recurrent conversations.
This is huge for diagnosing institutions, because it means a culture is not what a society or a company says it values. It's not the mission statement carved in marble in the lobby. Culture is what people recursively, repeatedly live and do with one another.
If we use this as our X-ray, we can look right through the declared values of any institution.
Oh, absolutely.
A university might declare in its brochures that it values curiosity, wellness, and lifelong learning. But what are the recurrent conversations?
Right. If the actual daily operations consist of grading on a curve, ranking students against each other, enforcing brutal deadlines, and conserving the shame of making an error, then the culture is not curiosity.
No, the culture is fear and competition.
A tech company might have beanbag chairs and free lunches and declare that they are a family. But if the recurrent conversation is an expectation that you answer emails at 2:00 a.m. and your value is strictly tied to your output, the culture is extraction.
And the paper points out the ultimate, unavoidable test for any culture, the litmus test for whether a culture is viable. And that test is the child.
The child.
Right.
Because culture reproduces itself by integrating new members.
Exactly. A culture must conserve itself by teaching the child how to participate in its network of conversations. So the ultimate diagnostic question is, does this culture conserve a relational niche where children grow up to become loving, self-respecting, reflective, and socially responsible human beings?
Or does it conserve a world where children learn ranking, fear, performance anxiety, and emotional abandonment?
Right. If a civilization is incredibly technologically advanced, if it has flying cars and cures for diseases and massive GDP, but it raises its children in a medium of intense anxiety, social isolation, and conditional worth.
And it is fundamentally failing.
Yes. It is failing the test of life coherence because it is failing to conserve humanness.
And when a culture consistently fails that test, when its recurrent conversations consistently negate the legitimacy of the people inside it, what happens? I mean, people don't just brush it off. This leads directly into the paper's exploration of suffering.
It does.
If I'm tracking the logic here, suffering in this framework isn't just about experiencing pain. Pain is inevitable. I stub my toe, it hurts. I lose a loved one, I feel profound grief.
Yes, pain is biological.
But the paper makes a sharp distinction between pain and suffering. Suffering is defined specifically as the conserved negation of love.
That is a critical distinction. Grief is a natural biological response to loss. It doesn't negate your legitimacy. Suffering occurs when you are forced to live in a relational space where your legitimacy is denied and where that denial becomes the recurrent pattern of your life.
It's the normalization of the wound.
Yes. Think about a child who is constantly humiliated by a parent or a teacher. The initial humiliation is a sharp emotional pain. But the suffering sets in when the child structurally couples to that environment and organizes their entire manner of living around the belief that the humiliation is normal, or worse, that it is deserved.
They internalize the negation of love.
Precisely.
It's when the culture gaslights you into accepting your own illegitimacy. When a corporate culture demands you sacrifice your health for a deadline and calls it dedication. Or on a macro scale, when a society continually exploits natural resources and indigenous lands and calls it economic development, we normalize the negation of love and we call it progress.
And because suffering is a systemic, recurrent conversation, healing it is not a simple fix. You cannot treat systemic suffering the way a mechanic treats a broken engine. You can't just mandate that everyone take a seminar on empathy.
Because healing cannot be forced. The paper is very clear about this. A living system only changes according to its own structure.
Precisely. You cannot command someone to heal. You cannot demand that a traumatized employee suddenly trust leadership again just because you issued an apology memo.
Right.
Healing, in this grammar, is defined as the restoration of trust. It is the slow reestablishment of a relational domain where self-respect and respect for the other can actually reappear.
So what is the role of a leader or a therapist or a parent if they can't force the healing?
Their role is to change the medium. A healer can only create the relational conditions, the margin of safety, where the wounded person feels secure enough to let down their defenses and reorganize their own living.
And if you try to push it,
If you try to force healing through control or pressure, you are just reproducing the exact dynamic of domination that caused the suffering in the first place.
okay, this brings up a massive, incredibly difficult question for me. Let's say I am trapped in one of these toxic systems. I'm in a relationship or a workplace that is actively negating my legitimacy, and I'm suffering. How do I step out of it?
That's the big question.
The paper talks a lot about this concept of reflection. It calls it the double look, the moment where a human being becomes able to see how they're living. The moment you realize that the inherited toxic world isn't the only possible world.
Right.
But practically speaking, how do you do that from the inside? If I'm drowning, I can't easily reflect on the fluid dynamics of the water.
That is the paradox of reflection.
Yeah.
And the insight Maturana provides here is profound. Reflection is only possible from a relational ground of love.
Wait, I need love to be able to reflect.
Yes, you cannot reflect if you are constantly defending yourself against annihilation. If you are in a state of fear, your menu of actions is restricted to survival, fight, flight, freeze.
Wow, okay.
Reflection requires you to release your certainty, to let go of your immediate defenses, and to look at your own behavior objectively. You can only take that vulnerable pause if you feel fundamentally legitimate and safe.
Oh, wow. That explains so many failed corporate initiatives.
Oh, absolutely.
Imagine a company that is ruthless, highly competitive, and currently laying off 10% of its workforce. Morale is terrible. So management brings in an expensive consultant to facilitate a reflective conversation about company culture. They sit everyone in a circle and say, let's be open and honest about how we can improve.
And it is met with total silence or meaningless corporate speak.
Exactly. It always fails. And the leaders usually blame the employees for not being vulnerable.
Yeah.
But through this viability grammar, the failure is obvious. The employees are operating in a domain of fear.
Yep.
If they speak the truth, they might lose their jobs. You cannot force a reflective conversation in a medium of aggression.
Love is the prerequisite for reflection. It provides the firm ground to stand on so you can step back and take that double look at the system you are participating in.
Okay, so let's say I find that safe ground. I take the pause, I look at my workplace or my society, and I finally see the recurrent conversations that are causing suffering. I see the X-ray. What do I actually do with that realization? Does this framework give us any actionable tools, or is it just philosophy?
It is highly actionable, but again, we have to translate our traditional vocabulary. The paper moves us from reflection directly into ethics, responsibility, freedom, and ultimately transformation.
Okay, let's start with ethics.
Right, because usually we think of ethics as a rule book, a list of things you can and cannot do to avoid getting sued.
Yeah, compliance training.
That is a legalistic view. In this framework, ethics is not a set of cold, rational calculations imposed from the outside. Ethics is simply the care for the consequences of our actions on others in coexistence.
They're for consequences.
Yes. And therefore, ethics inherently belongs to the domain of love. If the other person does not matter to you as a legitimate being, all the rational rule books in the world won't make you ethical. They will just make you compliant when you are being watched and destructive when you aren't.
And if ethics is caring about the consequences, that ties perfectly into how the author redefines responsibility. I found this to be one of the most liberating concepts in the entire source material.
It really changes everything.
The paper makes a massive distinction. Responsibility is not blame, it is not guilt.
This cannot be overstated. In our culture, when something goes wrong, the first question is, who is responsible? Which really means, who can we blame? Who can we punish?
Right.
Blame is an act of aggression. It requires a victim and a perpetrator.
But if responsibility isn't blame, what is it?
Yeah.
Because we don't want people just getting away with terrible things. We need accountability.
Responsibility in this grammar is simply answerability for participation. It is the reflective ability to say, I see how I participate in what is being conserved.
Oh, that's powerful.
It's not saying, I caused all of this toxic culture and I am a terrible, guilty person. It is saying, through my daily actions, my silence in meetings, my compliance with unreasonable demands, I am participating in keeping this specific network of conversations going.
That distinction completely removes the paralysis of shame. Blame makes you defensive. It makes you hide. Responsibility, defined as awareness of participation, just makes you awake. You can own your part without needing to be destroyed for it.
And that awakening leads directly to freedom. But predictably, the paper redefines freedom too.
Of course it does. Because in Western culture, freedom usually just means the absence of constraint. Or it means consumer choice. Like, I am free because I can choose between 50 different types of cereal at the grocery store.
That is just variations within a cage. True freedom, structurally speaking, is the reflective possibility of no longer conserving what one does not want to conserve.
Meaning, I see the automatic pattern I've been participating in, and I actively choose not to repeat it today. But let me push back a bit on how practical this is.
Go ahead.
If I reflect, and I take responsibility for my participation, and I decide I want to be free, my toxic boss doesn't magically disappear. The oppressive system still exists. Am I really free?
It doesn't mean the external constraints vanish. Institutional structures are designed to diffuse responsibility so no one individual feels the weight of the harm being done. The hospital protocol still demands a doctor only spend 7 minutes with the patient.
The pressure is real.
The external pressure is very real. But freedom is realizing that you do not have to automatically enact the inherited emotional pattern. You can change your own conversation within it.
You can change the emotional domain you bring to the 7 minutes.
Yes. Which is the genesis of transformation. Transformation is not adopting a new corporate slogan. A company changing its logo to be green is just a variation of the same system.
Right.
Transformation only happens when an entirely new conversation actually becomes recurrent and begins to conserve itself.
So the smallest unit of true transformation isn't a massive revolution. It's incredibly localized. It's a single, recurrent, relational act.
Precisely.
It's the teacher who decides, day after day, to correct a student's mistakes without humiliating them until that safety becomes the new, conserved culture of that specific classroom.
Exactly. You change the conserved manner of living, one structural coupling at a time.
But wait, if transformation is just a new recurrent conversation, how do we know if the transformation is actually good?
What do you mean?
Well, a company could transform its culture from chaotic fear to highly organized, polite, algorithmic extraction. The new culture might feel calmer, but it's still fundamentally using people. How do we measure the quality of the systems we are building?
This brings us to the ultimate goal of Dr. Sathi's paper, the concept of life coherence and the actual diagnostic tool he provides to measure it.
Life coherence.
Yes. Life coherence is defined simply as conservation that does not betray living. The question is, does this system keep life livable for human beings?
And the paper is quick to point out that stability is not proof of life coherence.
Not at all. A maximum security prison is incredibly stable.
Yeah.
A totalitarian regime can be very stable for decades, but they betray living.
And growth isn't proof either.
No. A tumor grows rapidly. An extractive timber industry can show massive year-over-year economic growth while completely destroying the forest that sustains it. Growth without life coherence is pathology.
Which is why the author insists we must adopt an ecological lens. We have to look at the biggest medium of all, the Earth. The paper argues that civilization must conserve the Earth as a living medium, not just as a resource base.
This is a profound shift in perspective. If you view the Earth merely as a resource, then extracting from it as efficiently as possible is a totally rational behavior.
It's just good business.
Right. But if you view it as the living medium that you are structurally coupled with, meaning your survival depends on its survival, then reciprocity isn't just a nice environmentalist idea. It is a biological necessity. Destroying your medium is destroying yourself.
Okay, so we need a tool to measure if our schools, businesses, and societies are life coherent. And the source material provides one. It visualizes this viability grammar as a tree, the 8 diagnostic primitives. This is the actual X-ray machine we've been looking for.
Yes, it is. Let's walk through this tree because this is the practical toolkit listeners can take into their lives today.
Let's do it.
At the center of the tree, the trunk and the roots, is love, the relational ground of humanness. This means that before you ask any other question, you must acknowledge that treating the other as a legitimate being is the foundation. If that isn't present, the system is already failing.
Okay, so circling that central trunk are 8 specific questions, or primitives, we can ask to diagnose any system. Let's run through them and see how they apply. Number 1 is conservation. What is actually being conserved here? Not what do they say they value, but what recurrent behavior is protected at all costs.
Right. And number 2 is constraint. What limits possibilities in this space?
Number 3 is margin. How much room remains for viable change? If a system is running at 100% capacity with no margin, any disturbance will shatter it.
Exactly. Number 4 is disturbance. What triggers a change? Is it an internal realization or does it require external trauma?
Continuing around the tree. Number 5 is present structure. What embodied history does the response arise from? Like, why does the system react the way it does based on its past?
Right. Number 6 is regulation. What recurrent dynamics restore the pattern? When something disrupts the culture, how does the culture force things back to the status quo?
Number 7 is relevance. What becomes visible or invisible in this system?
And finally, number 8 is possible doings. What can actually be lived next? What behaviors are available on the menu?
This tree is incredible. I want listeners to think about their own workplace right now through this lens. Take primitive 6, regulation. When a disturbance happens in your office, say a major project deadline is missed, how does the system regulate itself?
That's a great test.
Does it trigger a collaborative problem-solving session to support the team? Or does it trigger a witch hunt to find a scapegoat and reestablish a culture of fear? Or look at primitive 7, relevance. In your company's monthly meetings, what is considered relevant? Is it solely profit margins and shareholder value? Are the exhaustion and mental health of the employees completely invisible to the diagnostic metrics?
Because if the well-being of the people is invisible, then the system lacks life coherence. The purpose of these 8 primitives is to anchor us. They force us to look past the PR campaigns and the mission statements and rigidly ask whether the manner of living we are conserving is actually supporting human existence.
Honestly, this tool feels like a superpower. You can take these 8 questions into any board meeting, any family dispute, or any political debate and just completely deconstruct what is actually happening. You could use this to prove exactly why your toxic boss is wrong or why a certain policy is objectively bad.
And that instinct you just expressed is exactly why Dr. Seholi issues a massive, unavoidable warning at the very end of the paper. It is called the recursive safeguard.
Oh, right. The warning not to weaponize the grammar.
Yes. The author knows how tempting it is to take a powerful diagnostic tool and use it to win an argument. But he explicitly states, you cannot use this grammar as a weapon to attack others.
Because if I use this framework to accuse my boss, to dominate a conversation, or to declare that someone else is illegitimate because they are acting in aggression, I am violating the very foundation of the framework itself.
Exactly. If you use the grammar of life coherence to diminish someone else, you are instantly operating in the domain of use and aggression. You have abandoned love.
Wow.
This is the danger of any moral language or psychological framework. It can so easily become an ideology, a tool for control, and a way to establish your own superiority.
So how do we use it without weaponizing it?
The grammar must apply to itself. Diagnosis must always be an invitation, never an imposition. When you look at a system, whether it's your family or your government, and you ask, what is being conserved here? You as the observer must simultaneously turn the lens inward and ask, what am I conserving by asking this question?
Like, am I conserving a genuine desire to heal, to reflect, and to create a better world? Or am I just trying to prove that I'm enlightened and everyone else is ignorant?
If it's the latter, you are just conserving another form of domination. The tool only works if it is wielded in love.
We have taken an absolutely massive journey today. Let's try to synthesize the ground we've covered. We started by completely throwing out the idea that human systems are machines.
Right.
We redefined living not as just surviving, but as an ongoing, structurally coupled dance with our environment. We realized that behavior isn't just an internal output, but a relational flow. We looked at how our emotioning, specifically whether we operate in love or aggression, dictates the actual menu of behaviors available to us.
From there, we explored how our conversations, the braiding of our language and our emotions, build the cultures we live in.
Yep.
We saw how cultures can either heal us by restoring trust or make us suffer by normalizing the denial of our legitimacy. And finally, we looked at how reflection and responsibility give us the freedom to stop conserving the toxic patterns, allowing us to slowly transform our world using the 8 primitives as our guide.
It is a radically different, almost dizzying lens to look through. It shifts the burden of fixing the world away from massive abstract revolutions and places it squarely in our daily relational interactions.
It really does.
So I want to leave you, the listener, with the direct challenge. Tomorrow, or even later today, look closely at your interactions. When you are talking to your partner, your kids, your boss, or the barista at the coffee shop, what manner of living are you actively conserving?
That's the question.
In that brief 5-second interaction, are you conserving a space of use where they are just a means to an end? Or are you conserving a space of love where they don't have to justify their existence?
And if I may leave you with a final, slightly haunting thought extrapolated from Maturana's biology.
Please do.
If human beings are fundamentally wired for love and mutual trust as the absolute basis of our biological survival, what happens to the physical biology of a species that spends generations successfully adapting to a global culture of mistrust, control, and relentless extraction?
Oh, wow.
If we continuously structurally couple to an environment that negates our humanness, do we eventually evolve into a completely different kind of being entirely? Or do we simply stop being viable?
That is a question that will keep me up at night. If the old X-ray machine is broken, maybe we need to stop staring at the screen looking for a jagged white line and start looking at the ground we are building and walking on together. Thank you for joining us on another journey. Keep reflecting, stay curious, and keep diving deep.